Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi, and I'm taking care of business. Joining me today is Anne-Marie Lurie, who is Chief Economist with the Calgary Real Estate Board. Thanks for joining us today, Anne-Marie.
Thanks for having me.
Well, interesting day for you and the board. The release today of the annual forecast by CREB. Let's take a look at the forecast and some of the numbers. First of all, everybody wants to know about prices, right? What do you foresee as price increases this year in the real estate market?
We do expect to see further gains in prices this year. Overall citywide, we're expecting kind of over 4% increase with higher gains in the detached sector of the market. Mostly because the detached sector is so tight in terms of supply versus demand balances. So it's going to take a little longer for that to become more balanced. So fairly strong price increases still expected this year, but not as bad as it was last year.
Okay, super. And let's look at sales. We're coming off a record year for MLS sales in Calgary. What do you think will happen this year in that area?
Well, we do expect that sales will come off of those record levels. So we don't expect another record year, but we do expect that sales will still remain relatively strong. And there's several reasons for this. In part, our economy is starting to improve. We're seeing improvements in sort of our fundamentals with job growth. Also, there's a lot of people who just weren't able to get in the market before. So there still is a lot of that demand coming from people who didn't potentially get in earlier. So that's still going to support a fairly strong market, but not quite as strong as what we had last year.
Okay, let's talk about supply. It's been an issue here in Calgary for a little while. Not enough homes out there to meet the demand that's being present. Where is supply going for the rest of the year? I know it's a tight market still right now.
Well, we do expect that, as the year progresses, especially in the later part of the year, as opposed to more so in the spring, we do expect that those listings will still remain relatively robust. And given that supplies or demand is supposed to ease a bit, we should see inventory levels start to improve a bit, creating much more balanced conditions. But supply has been a bit of a challenge, and it's kind of one of those things that I outline as, while we expect that it should start to improve, it has stayed stubbornly low for some time. So,
okay, let's talk about some of the factors out there, Anne-Marie, that might have an impact on your forecast. Number one factor, of course, is interest rates. And I guess we'll know soon enough what's happening there. But how will that impact the market going forward?
Well, this is the main thing that we've been watching for. It is expected that rates are going to go up this year. Now, whether they start to increase tomorrow or not is somewhat debated, but it is expected that we're going to see some pretty significant gains as we move through the end of the year. Now, and that's one of the reasons why we also feel that demand won't be as strong this year because of those rising rates, especially in the later part of the year. What will be interesting, and I think what I view as something I'll be watching closely, is how much those rates increase. Like currently, most forecasts point to maybe a total of a 1% increase. But I've seen ranges, so I think that's actually something that is on my radar in terms of how much is that rise going to be. And is it going to be too much too soon? And that can have a lot of impact on the housing market. So I think that's the one thing that I am probably a bit more cautious about in terms of, what that impact can be, and something I'll be watching very closely this year.
And let's not forget, we're all still in the whole COVID situation, right? What if we have another wave or another 2 waves or whatever, right? Yeah. How does that impact the housing market going forward?
Well, and that's on a few different levels. I mean, housing has been fairly resilient despite COVID. So I think that's something to consider. But where I'm looking at it is, when will we see that return to normal in our economy? A lot of the growth in terms of employment and migration is based off the fact that we are expected to return to more normal conditions. So I think where COVID is, if you have further shutdowns, well, that's going to delay some of that economic improvement. So that's something to kind of consider as we move forward. And will we be able to support the same level of demand that we're seeing? Or will inflation become more of a problem than we expect and causing higher interest rates? Because we know some of that impact on inflation has been due to supply chain problems.
Yeah.
So that's another thing to kind of consider on how COVID, and to me, all three of them are almost interrelated at this stage. So.
Yeah. And last thing, Anne-Marie, can you talk a little bit about the factors that support the housing market right now in Calgary? Or, you know, we're looking at a positive economic outlook in terms of growth, or employment growth, population and net migration growth, right? Can you talk a little bit about those?
Sure. So there's a couple things. Like, first of all, we've started to see improvements in employment. It started last year, but they weren't necessarily pandemic related job growth. So we started to see improvements in things like professional and technical services, and industries that tend to be a little bit higher paid, which really does have a benefit towards our housing market. Now, that growth is expected to continue this year, and not just in, like, there is supposed to be more return of jobs for people who were most impacted by the pandemic. So we're expected to see growth there, but we're expected to continue to see that growth in those professional and technical jobs, which is really a good sign. And I mean, even longer term prospects, the fact that we're seeing improvements in the tech industry, so it's not just driven by energy anymore, that's a good thing in terms of our longer term prospects. So I'm seeing those as a lot of positives. Migration has been one of those things that's kind of had me a bit more concerned before. I mean, we've had general outflows out of this province for the most part for some time. We did start to see a turnaround in those numbers in Q3. We started to see a much more positive inflow. Calgary has generally been outperforming the province in terms of population growth. And all of that is really a good sign in terms of longer term sort of demand growth. So those are kind of the two key factors that I'm looking at that supports some of the housing demand that we're seeing, and something that'll continue beyond 2022.
All right, super. Well, thanks very much, Anne-Marie, for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, that was Anne-Marie Lurie, who is Chief Economist with the Calgary Real Estate Board. I'm Mario Toneguzzi, and this has been Taking Care of Business. Thanks for joining us today.